In our drive today, we're going to be talking about the emerging political philosophy of post-liberalism. This philosophy has been associated with the new U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, and the controversial Project 2025. So let's see what we can define about this kind of moving target of an idea and consider some of its pros, cons, goals, and concerns. To give post-liberalism a quick and basic definition, it holds that classical and social liberalism's excessive focus on things like individual autonomy and free markets has led to the erosion of social bonds and a decline in collective well-being. Some post-liberals view liberalism as having mutated into a kind of ultra-liberalism that is intolerant and authoritarian in its pursuit of individual self-assertion. Others hold that the classic liberal positions like free markets and limited government have allowed selfish, wealthy individuals to take unfair advantage of those with less influence, causing a decline in economic security. In either case, post-liberal thinkers accuse liberalism of promoting this kind of atomized individualism, which leads to undermining social cohesion throughout all levels of society. So what kind of public policy prescriptions do they offer? Well, instead of various forms of individualism, post-liberals promote a communitarian approach that prioritizes the common good, social solidarity, and the cultivation of virtue, often drawing upon traditional moral and religious frameworks. Post-liberals think that by just primarily focusing on the individual, liberalism forgets how important strong families and communities are to a healthy society. They often point to things like rising divorce rates, declining birth rates, and the addiction crisis as evidence for that. Basically, they see the focus on hyper-individualism from the individual doing entirely as they please without regard to the larger community to a corporation running roughshod over its employees and customers, is actually harming society in the long run. Post-liberals also argue that this focus weakens things like religion and a shared national identity, the things that used to give people a sense of belonging and purpose. They believe that this results in people feeling lost, of feeling disconnected and adrift due to the erosion of traditional values and societal connections. Post-liberals contend that humans are not isolated individuals, but are inherently social beings whose identities and values are shaped by their cultural and communal contexts. To deal with this, they believe that there should be a more active role for the government in promoting the common good, potentially through measures that encourage childbearing, support families, and strengthen social safety nets, thereby increasing social solidarity while providing a shared sense of purpose. Post-liberals are also often critical of globalization and corporatism for weakening actual free markets and creating economic inequality. They point out that it leads to too much wealth and power concentrated in a small group of elites while everyone else gets left behind, and, in that way, fueling resentment and makes society unstable. Some think that post-liberalism can be understood through what's called narrative theology. Let's take a moment to consider how this perspective emphasizes the power of narratives in shaping human understanding and social reality. Post-liberalism seeks to challenge the prevailing social liberal narrative with its emphasis on hyper-individualism and unscrupulous pursuit of material prosperity by offering alternative stories centered on community, tradition, and shared values. Some post-liberals draw upon religious traditions and moral frameworks to provide an alternative vision of the good life. Christian post-liberals, for example, emphasize a narrative of Christian identity and heritage, stressing its historical and cultural importance. This narrative often accentuates the importance of the spiritual or metaphysical dimensions of human existence, countering what they see as liberalism's emphasis on crass materialism and hedonism. Post-liberalism, both on the left and right, tends to understand itself through narrative identity, a story to make sense of themselves and the world, in contrast to the materialistic narratives of liberalism. Right-leaning post-liberals, such as J.D. Vance, frequently emphasize narratives of cultural, religious, and national identity. Left-leaning post-liberals believe it or not, there are some, often focus on narratives of civil rights liberation and the struggle against oppression, what is sometimes called liberation theology. These narratives provide a framework for understanding social and political issues, as well as for motivating action and solidarity within a specific group. To get a handle on this narrative idea, let's next look at how the role of religion, especially Christianity, and especially in America, fits into this discussion. A lot of post-liberals see the decline of Christian influence as a key part of a cultural crisis, a crisis of values in Western society. They believe a healthy society needs a strong moral foundation, some kind of bedrock to rest upon, and historically, they argue, Christianity has provided that in Western society. Of course, there's a lot of differences of opinion on how much influence the church should have with the state, with some wanting them tightly integrated, while others see more of a limited partnership. Next, let's consider how some of these post-liberal ideas have actually played out in the real world. While the second Trump administration is only a few weeks old, as of me writing this script, and the influence of J.D. Vance on it is still largely an unknown factor, we can draw on some examples from elsewhere in the world. One of the most notable is Viktor Orban, the Hungarian prime minister, who some have called the Trump before Trump. His policies have emphasized national identity, traditional families, and pushing back against globalism. The pro-natalist policies he has put into place are designed to encourage family formation while reducing the need for immigration. For example, female university graduates who have children within 2 years of graduation receive some forgiveness on their student loans, and Hungarian women who have 4 or more children are eligible for full income tax exemption for life. Other subsidies and financial support for eligible married couples are also provided. He has also implemented several tax reforms, such as a flat income tax, as well as imposing windfall taxes on some companies to maintain a government-subsidized cap on utility bills. However, we must also note that his time in office has been marked by some reductions in individual freedoms, including increasing censorship, concerns about the democratic process, and accusations of economic cronyism and corruption. Is this the model that a Trump-Vance administration will pursue for good and bad? That remains to be seen, although I think we will see a stronger focus on families and national identity, along with stricter immigration policies, and perhaps a more assertive foreign policy. One question I see as still outstanding is how these policies will work in areas such as addressing our considerable economic problems, especially inflation, housing, and income inequality. I think they were elected to deal with these economic issues, but as the saying goes, it's tough to drain the swamp when you're up to your ass in alligators. Overall, we can recognize that in building essentially a new political system, well, that always comes with risks, and failure isn't out of the question, due to hubris, greed, and unforeseen human factors. Speaking of risks, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the A word, authoritarianism. People get really worried about that these days, so it gets thrown around a lot, especially by the political opposition and left-leaning media pundits. But are the worries really justified here? In my view, it's important not to use the word lightly, not just throwing it around as a way to criticize a policy we don't like. But with post-liberalism, perhaps some of those concerns aren't totally unfounded. The focus on a strong state, on certain values being promoted, along with the idea of significant limits on individual freedom, certainly raises some questions. Could the government overreach in trying to shape society, resulting in oppression? Could dissent or individual preferences be suppressed or even outlawed in favor of the dominant ones? Could all too human character flaws lead to tyranny? Critics worry that this post-liberal society, with its focus on shared values to achieve the good life for the majority, could end up excluding people who don't fit the mold, who don't fit in. If the state is promoting a specific set of values, what about everyone else? What about the people who believe something different, something outside of what's considered the norm? Will a post-liberal society tolerate them to some degree, or will they be pressured to change, to conform, or else? And we need to bear in mind that some of these ideas, like nationalism, have some serious historical baggage. We've seen how appealing to tradition or community or national identity can be used for bad things, to justify some terrible stuff. The 20th century is full of examples of that, especially genocidal fascism and ethno-nationalism. These cautionary tales from history leads us to think what happens when any ideology tries to force one single vision on everyone. So how do post-liberals respond to this concern? Well, they argue that a strong state doesn't automatically equal an authoritarian state. They talk about something called common good constitutionalism, where the government plays an active role in making sure everyone has a fair shot at a good life, but without it becoming a dictatorship, without trampling on individual rights. They want you to imagine a system where you still have your freedoms, but the government is also making sure everyone has access to a good education, health care, and decent wages, essentially a safety net. You may say that's all well and good, but what about all those different viewpoints? Can you really have a strong, values-based society in a nation with a large and diverse population? Some advocates of the post-liberal concept are exploring the idea of rooted cosmopolitanism. They see that it's about recognizing that local traditions and attachments are important, but also being open to other cultures and ways of thinking. Essentially, it's trying to find that middle ground between hyper-individualism, which they see as rootless, and a closed-off society where everyone has to be the same. But can this idea of rooted cosmopolitanism actually work in the real world, though? That's a good question. Some critics say it's just a contradiction, that a society can't have both, because it'll lead to excluding people who are different, outsiders who don't fit into the dominant culture. So I guess it seems like there's a real balancing act in play here between wanting a more community-oriented, values-driven society while also protecting individual freedom and making space for all those different viewpoints. But I suppose the big question remains, if both classical and social liberalism are really on their way out, like a lot of people say, what comes next? What fills the void? Post-liberals do seem to think they have a path forward that's different from the corporatist, technocratic, globalist worldview that has predominated over the past few decades. Will their vision of a society where community comes first, shared values are important, especially religious values, stronger families, and a government shaping the path towards this goal actually work? Can it serve as a public policy antidote to the disillusionment and apathy that has become common in modern life? Do you see these ideas as a little scary? What with the potential for the loss of individual freedom? What if you don't want to conform to the community standards? Could this lead to more social control, perhaps to the point of oppression? We know from history that there's no perfect solution, no utopia here. As Rudyard Kipling put it in MacDonough's song, "But holy state, we have lived to learn, endeth in holy war." So it's not about whether post-liberalism is a perfect solution. It's more about whether it's better than what we have now, as compared to the flaws of liberalism and globalist technocracy. And it's important to remember, post-liberalism isn't just one thing, not a monolithic idea based around the ideas expressed in Project 2025. It's a bunch of different ideas with different people focusing on different things. Some folks have really focused on traditional religious values, mostly Christian ones, and they want closer ties between church and state with laws that reflect Christian principles. Then you have those who are more about national identity and sovereignty, and who are skeptical of globalism and immigration, especially those who feel like globalization has hurt them. And, as I mentioned, there are some post-liberals coming from the left side of the political spectrum. They agree with the critiques of global corporate capitalism and how it's created problems in society and the economy, such as economic inequalities. But instead of focusing on traditional values, they want a stronger safety net with more government assistance and worker and environmental protections. Basically, both sides often find themselves united by what they dislike while being divided on the possible solutions. In some ways, it's a political movement that's still figuring itself out, similar to how liberal democracies developed in the 17th and 18th centuries. We don't know what it'll become, what it will eventually evolve into. It's like watching a political experiment in real time, with the old ways fading away and new ones trying to be born. Will the new ways take us forward, or will the old ways prevail and stamp out the opposition? Yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive, perhaps a bit unnerving at times, but definitely interesting. So if liberalism is really in decline, what does that mean for you? What are the things you value in a political system? What's more important to you, individualism or community, family, and religion? How do you think those things you value will be affected by all this political change? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want me to dig into any of these ideas deeper, let me know that as well. Also, let me know if you like this driving around format better than the animation format I was using. I value your feedback. Oh, and as always, do the like and subscribe thing to appease the AI overlords. Now I've got to get back home. I think my robotic assistant Matt said he was going to binge watch Cassandra on Netflix. I don't want him getting any bad ideas.